may be thinking that we're praying. Yahweh may be thinking they're just making a lot of racket. Hi, this is Barry Phillips with 10-Minute Torah, day number 4, the Torah portion, Bashalach. We're still today in Shemot, or Exodus, chapter number 14, and let's begin reading with verse number 9. And the Mitzrites pursued them, and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea, beside Pi Hahiroth, before Baal Zephon. And when the Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes and saw the Mitzrites coming up after them, and they were greatly afraid. So the children of Israel, here's the key word today, they cried out to Yahweh. And they said to Moshe, "Did you take us away to die in the wilderness because there are no burial sites in Mitzrayim? What is this that you have done to us to bring us up out of Mitzrayim?" We'll pause there and continue in a few minutes. And so their reaction then to the sight of Pharaoh is a phrase in Hebrew. And I'll try to say this correctly, V'yasachu v'nei Israel el Yahweh. And the word used here, V'yasachu, is the phrase to cry out. It is from a more root word, za'ach, which means to cry out, to call for help, and to clamor. To clamor. Is it possible that when we cry out to Yah in prayer, it is just clamor? The first two uses of this word are interesting for us. They're found back in Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 4, verse number 10. And Yah is speaking to Cain, and he says, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood," here's that word again, "it cries out to me from the ground." So it's as if the blood is either making a lot of noise and vibrating with the life that is in it from the ground, or else that blood is praying, calling out to Yah for vengeance. If we go to Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 27, and verse 14 says, "When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, 'Bless me too, O my father.'" So the cry is one that is bitter, it's loud, it's full of clamor, it's full of a boisterous nature. And the people were crying out in panic. Now, how effective were their prayers? They weren't crying out to Moshe. It says here that they cried out to Yahweh. Then they turned to Moshe, concerning Pharaoh, and began to blame him. Now, what are they doing? It's kind of like the idea someone is standing on an island or in a place of needing rescue, and there's a plane flying overhead. What do? You start waving your arms back and forth, and while the pilot of the plane may not be able to hear, and will not be able to hear the words, they might notice the animation of the individual with the waving of arms. And they may be thinking they're just saying hello. They may not recognize that there's any danger involved or any need of rescue. So when we come before Yah and we're praying, are we merely making racket and throwing our hands in the air as if we're trying to get his attention? Is that what prayer is? Trying to get Yah's attention? So the level of their intercession is revealed in verses 11 and 12, where they began to complain, "We told you to leave us in Mitzrayim." I mean, there were graveyards in Mitzrayim for us to be buried in. We don't need to come out here and find a new graveyard to be put in the soil of. We could have died in Mitzrayim. Why did you bring us out here? Now, where was this idea expressed when they were marching out defiantly, rejoicing and celebrating that their chains were off and they had finally been liberated? Good boy, or Moshe. Well done, attaboy. You the man. Until trouble shows up. And then it says in verse 12, leave us alone. Let us serve the Mitzrites. It would have been better for us to serve the Mitzrites than to die in the wilderness. Really? Really? Now, I love the adage that says, I would rather die standing on my feet than live on my knees. There has to be a boldness that comes over Yah's people where we say, we will not bow down to your idols. We will not bow down and yield to your enslavement and your servitude. We have been made free and we're not going back there. That's the way we need to deal with our addictions, with our issues, with generational issues that arise and come up. So Moshe's response to them is in verse 13, do not be afraid, stand still and see. And this translation says the deliverance of Yahweh. The word there, deliverance, is a version of the word or the name Yeshua. Stand still and see the Yeshua of Yahweh. Moshe says, basically, I got this. I'll pray because I know that Yah hears me. So he begins to intercede and he begins to pray. And Yahweh says in verse 15, why do you cry to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them go forward. And you lift up your rod and stretch your hand out over the sea and divide it. And let the children of Israel go out on dry ground through the midst of the sea. Now let's analyze what's being said here. Moshe, you've been instrumental and mightily used in the exhibition of these plagues that have come upon the land of Mitzrayim. You have been a key player. You've stood before Pharaoh. You have grown and matured in this understanding of my power. It's not time to pray. It's time to act. Now, there's a sticky subject. Do we go ahead and keep praying, or will we start acting? There is a time for prayer. There's always a time for prayer, intercession, coming before the Father, making our petitions and requests known to Him, discerning and hearing His voice and understanding what it is that He's called us to do. But when the need arises, when the moment is hot with expectation and need of demonstration of Yah's power, the prayers need to have already been prayed. It's time to move. When Peter and John, Yochanan and Kepha, when they went to the temple and they came by the gate called Beautiful and the crippled man, the lame man was there, it wasn't time to stop and pray for an hour and then try to pull the man to his feet. They acted boldly, took the man by his hand, lifted him up to his feet, and the man went leaping and dancing and praising Elohim. Why? How did they do that? They had already been praying. They had already sought the Father. They already had the power instilled in them. And it's not to say that we go off, John Wayne style with our 6 guns of anointing and power and healing, and we're just shooting off everywhere. There needs to be a discerning of the Father's face, His will, looking on those that are ready to receive anointing and letting the anointing flow. It's founded on prayer. But prayer is not saying, hey, Yah, please do something. Prayer is finding His face, inviting Him to act, and then when He's ready to act, be the vessel that He acts through. It takes some learning, and we're all still learning this. More tomorrow. To this, shalom.